support increasing the military budget despite ending the Afghanistan war that cost $300 million per day. So how does that make sense? Where are you spending that fund, sir? What is your goal? And the goal of these right-wing populists is to expand war elsewhere against the real threats, the communists, the socialists, to expand war to maintain capitalist hegemony. And people like the average neocon, like Martin Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, they will argue that Ukraine war is largely a waste of United States resources. It's not that they're anti-imperialist. They believe our resources should be spent somewhere else. So with that said, I'm going to show you guys Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? And I cannot emphasize this enough because I think this still adds to our other commentary. It's deeply embarrassing that Marjorie Taylor Greene outflanked the squad on the Ukraine war. How do you allow this person I'm about to show you, who is absolutely clueless about the world, who's absolutely a puppet of the establishment, how do you let her outflank you on any issue at all? So Marjorie Taylor Greene is not anti-war. She is not principled. She is using this to attack Joe Biden. And based on my instinct, as I said before, they're doing this because it's a great political strategy. But I don't believe none of these people, because they're not driven by ideology. They are driven by hatred of the Democrats. Best believe it. It was Donald Trump. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene bootlicking him like she's prepared to do. Do not trust politicians. These people do not act in good faith. And that's always been the premise of all my videos about these people. Now, this video, I think I'm prefaced this enough. It's beyond ridiculous because you're going to have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Steve Bannon in the lead up of her insane comment, which is the base of this story. They still pretending that Jim Crow Joe is weaker on immigration than Donald Trump. You know, the guy who's funding the border industrial complex more than Trump, the guy who deported more people than Trump, deported more Haitians than Trump, who expanded and continue detention centers that they call migrant overflow facilities now. The right is still pretending that the Democratic Party is weaker on them on immigration, even though Barack Obama deported more people in his first term than Donald Trump. And what they are going to miss in this video is that the immigration crisis is a crisis of imperialism. This is a crisis of imperialism. You got a ton of Venezuelans, you got Haitians, a ton of people who are victims of a U.S. empire that's crossing the border, and they completely ignore that part of the conversation. So
Nick, it's like they're sitting in a boat and another boat has capsized because of them. And those people are trying to run over to the boat. And they're like, we have a crisis of the water. And without telling you the story of what happened, you know what I'm saying? And that's what it feels like.
And these people also ignore the fact that the United States is losing net immigration over the border. That's something they never bring up. They pretend that there's this invasion. America is a shithole that people are leaving more than people are coming in. So this immigration issue is completely made up. Because if you're a nation, you would think you want to replace your workforce. You got people leaving. You want people to come in. So this is all about people like, oh my God, white people are about to be displaced. That's what this is all about. This whole fear-mongering over borders that literally did not exist centuries ago. Read a fucking history book. The concept of open border during the Rome Empire, people used to cross all the time. It's a new modern capitalist construct that is enforced by white supremacy because white people are afraid that they're going to lose their population. That is what it is. And as Marxists, there's no tolerance for this shit. We are for the freedom of the movement for the workers. The same position that libertarians used to have. But anyway, I don't want to rant. I'll spare you guys because I can rant on that topic all day. But let's get to the video because I want to preface this. It's
so funny, Nick, because 2 minutes ago I put up a comment. Somebody said, I feel like Nick is going to go on another dishes rant. And you did.
I can't help myself.
So funny.
I get to the damn video. All right, guys. I get to the damn video. I can't help myself. Because I saw
No, they were saying in a good way, though. They were saying in a good way.
Yeah, I know. I love when you guys give me constructive criticism. I know I got a lot to grow on. Let's watch this video, and then I can comment a little bit more. I'm going to let it play for a bit because literally the first 90 seconds is just immigration fear-mongering. You guys can chime in if you want. I don't have much to add. I already did. So chime in if you guys want, but the main point in this segment is going to come a little bit later.
How many Democrats were there with you, ma'am, to assist you in this field committee hearing that was so powerful, and heard Chief of Border Patrol Ortiz say we don't have operational control? That's a bombshell. How many Democrats were there to assist you, Congressman Greene?
Zero. There were 0 Democrats there, Steve. You want to know why? Benny Thompson put out a statement. Now, never forget, you got to remember who Benny Thompson is. He was the chair of the January 6th committee, and he put out a statement and said that Democrats would not be coming to this hearing in McAllen, Texas yesterday for the Homeland Security Committee because Republicans were going to politicize the issue. Now, let's talk about who politicized an issue. That would be Benny Thompson. As a matter of fact, not only did he politicize January 6th, he weaponized the federal government and the power of the January 6th committee against President Trump, the Trump administration, you, Steve Bannon, and many others. And everyone got persecuted just because of Benny Thompson and the way he handled himself as chairman. And then for him to make the sorry excuse for all the Democrats, and they didn't even show up. They couldn't show up for work. You want to know why, Steve? Because they can't face the truth. They can't.
So the Republican Party keep using this as their example of why Democrats are weak on immigration. Biden not showing up at the border. He's not showing up at the border. AOC is not at the border. These Democrats not at the border. Why they not doing photo ops? They don't have to show up at the border because they're funding them more. Nigga, why will you have to show up at the border when you can just write a check? You understand that we live in the modern era, right? There is no reason for Biden to show up at the border. He can just write a check. He can support them monetarily. They had in March, and I covered this at the time last year, they had a border expo. I'm sure they're going to have another one again here coming up, where you have border control agents. It's like you know how Comic-Con is? It's like Comic-Con for fascists, where they all get together, they show off new border control technology. And during the expo, they was like, man, it's crazy what the Biden administration is doing for us. We got all these new toys. We got robot dogs now. He's giving us way more stuff than Trump has done.
Comic-Cons for fascists. That'd be a cool ass
It is.
I can imagine them all dressed up with those costumes. You know, I want to just make a very
go ahead.
A point that for those who still believe that these parties are really fighting each other, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi gave Donald Trump every single cent he wanted for ICE, CBP, and to fight his war on immigrants, Trump's war on immigrants. They expanded the Citizens Border Patrol and ICE under Trump, and Democrats funded it without flinching. There was no fight.
Yep.
This is before the election. And then Biden takes office, and what does he do? First of all, Biden's special envoy to Haiti resigned in disgust over the racist treatment of Haitian asylum seekers. And Americans don't know what's happening in Haiti if they don't listen to anything but mainstream media. Haiti is a shit show, and it is in no small part because of the United States. There are reasons people are leaving Haiti, and it's not just because they think they can have a quote-unquote better life, which usually means financial, in the United States. They're leaving Haiti because they're seeking political asylum. And Biden's own special envoy resigned because of our horrendous treatment. Obama's treatment of immigrants is well documented. The ACLU sued the Obama and Biden administration for, quote, horrendous, inhumane treatment of migrants at the border. Barack Obama and Joe Biden started family separation. Okay, there were immigrant families with kids whose children were taken from them at the border under Obama. What Trump did, he blew it up on steroids. He was horrible, but that all started with Obama. Obama put the kids in cages. Unaccompanied minors were put in cages, and Trump did it, and AOC shed tears. And Biden's even worse. But here's Marjorie. Marjorie Taylor Greene is not a bright and shining intellect on Capitol Hill, and everybody knows that. But she's a good lapdog for the quote-unquote pseudo-populist GOP,
yes.
Right? Because she comes out. I knew when she came out against the Ukraine war, it had nothing to do with the war being wrong. It had everything to do with, oh, here's something I can oppose Biden on. So we have a choice if we vote the duopoly. World War III, or, well, then there's a lot of Republicans who want war with China too, so don't even go there. Or the populist version of it, we can have war with Mexico and whoever else they decide to invade. This is not a choice. It is not a rational choice. These people are not anti-war. They are pro-colonialism. Ukraine is a colony of the United States, and they want Mexico to remain a colony of the United States. Interestingly, the president of Mexico doesn't seem to be having it right now. He said some things which the Biden administration doesn't like. I don't know if you guys have.
Yeah, Zink is. I was about to ask you just to hold that thought, because that's literally the next part of my segment. I don't mean to interrupt you, but hold that thought, because we're going to get to AMLO soon. Because there is a reason why you see Lindsey Graham and Marjorie Taylor Greene now calling for troops to Mexico. So, Zink, I'll pass it to you when that point comes up, because we're going to get to AMLO here very soon. Let me continue the video, because we still haven't got to the main part. The first part of this clip is immigration fear-mongering. Make sure the Republicans that support you are afraid, are scared, are groomed for the propaganda that you're about to suggest. You can't lead in with the shit that Marjorie Taylor Greene is about to say. You need a pregame. You need a warm up. So the first, I decided to show. I was about to cut it, but I do think it's important to see the first part, because it's the warm up to what Marjorie Taylor Greene is about to say later, which is crazy.
Face the truth and be exposed in that manner, and because we showed the American people, and thank God that Chief Ortiz finally admitted it, that we do not have operational control of our own southern border. Because all we hear in Washington, Steve, is war in Ukraine, war in Ukraine. We've got our own Republicans like Lindsey Graham and many others out there drumming beating the drum for war every single day in Ukraine, when the real drum we should be beating for war is the one against the Mexican cartels, because that's the one I'm beating.
What? Ma'am, are you okay? So she started to lean towards the populism, the anti-war Ukraine populism, and then immediately took a hard U-turn. And is this what Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Republicans been grooming their audience for? Come on, I don't support the Ukraine war. We shouldn't be spending money on the Ukraine war. Mexico looking pretty sexy, though. Why are we fighting the war in Ukraine? It don't mean they do geopolitical strategy for the United States, but Mexico does. You guys see what I'm saying? Their criticism is not, we need to end the evil U.S. empire. Their criticism is that the direction that the neoliberals and some of the neocons is going into the wrong direction to increase the United States power. Do not get it twisted. They don't give a fuck about the cartels. You guys think they give a fuck about drugs? Who's the biggest drug dealer in the world? The United States. Don't get it twisted. So I'm gonna show you guys something. Feel free. I don't know if you guys. I passed to you guys actually. I got one more receipt. CJ, Zink, is anything you want to chime in on before I move on to the next part?
I'll let the guests chime in. Go ahead.
It shouldn't have to be said, but it is deeply disturbing that this is where the GOP goes every single time. They are more blatant with their racism. You know, you could turn on Tucker Carlson and find a good analysis of Ukraine or some other issue, maybe some populist thing against Wall Street. But he always makes sure to beat up on brown people, especially immigrants, and the queer community every chance he and the other pundits on Fox get. The queer community, and let's acknowledge it. I mean, that's going on right now in Tennessee and all over, like trying to make people's identities illegal. That's a go-to for them. That and brown people. We can beat up on immigrants. They beat up on the voiceless. They're more blatant and overt with their hatred, whereas the Democrats will say they kneel in the kente cloths when they're funding the police with $37 billion extra dollars, and Biden continues to militarize police departments across the country. I mean, they've got robot dogs now, And those robot dogs aren't to fight crime. Those robot dogs are there to stop protest against what the government is doing. But it's really sad. And I think of the lives of the people who come here to the United States because no one wants to leave their home country. They're forced because of the situations that our banks and corporations create in our hemisphere, right? We want them to be slaves and to stay in their country and be slaves. And it's just a supremely racist government. Both parties are a part of it. And it's unacceptable and horrible.
So are we actually using crime as a pretext to invade another country now? Do you guys know how crazy this is? So the Republicans and the Democrats and our insane ruling class has used crime as an excuse to occupy our neighborhoods and use violence against people who, quote unquote, resist the government, right? So they saw how effective that was. They saw how they tricked white America into supporting this war against their own people that the NYPD, the LAPD, the Baltimore PD, and many others are waging, the St. Louis PD, the KCPD, the list go on and on, right? So they saw that they tricked white America with that. Oh my God, no, come on, man. We just waging war against our own people because of the drugs and the crime. And they saw how successful that was domestically, and now they're trying to expand it internationally. Oh my God, look at the cartels in Mexico. We only got to invade that country to control it. And obviously, AMLO is having none of it. Anyone who's a critical thinker should have none of this. And now I'll pass to your soon thing because I know you want to chime in more on AMLO. I'll read this tweet. This is AMLO. Your media doesn't even mention U.S. cartels. They just don't talk about it. It's as if the drugs arrived on a Martian balloon, as if people order drugs online via an invisible network. As if there are no drug traffickers in the United States. How do drugs get to the youth? Who sells it? Or is it only here? And then U.S. reporter so blown away, he was like, no. And then AMLO was like, but they don't talk about it. Just 2 months ago, they had to fire the head of the DEA in Mexico, and no one ever mentioned him again. So this is AMLO with the obvious response that you should have when you hear this nonsense. There's drug problems in multiple states. That is not an excuse to occupy. And you are out of your mind if you think that is the real reason why the Democrats want to invade. AMLO, as we explained before, has called out neoliberalism. AMLO has formed a coalition to rebuke the United States on their Cuban policy. You had Mexico, who recently had great comments about BRICS. They didn't say they're going to join. They hinted at it. They said it's a good option for countries who've been bullied by the West. This is stuff that AMLO said. He criticized the United States and their engagement in Ukraine. So he has become a menace that no one expected he would become. Like he still is more of a social democrat. No one really expected him to rebuke the U.S. West the way he has done. Now the Western leaders seeing this stuff is freaking out. So now they create a crisis like the cartels who's been there my entire life. My entire life, there's been Mexican cartels. I remember the beheading videos back in the early 2000s that I avoided to death, right? But now all of a sudden it's a unique problem. You think that came out of nowhere? Ridiculous. Sorry, I'm gonna pass to Zinkis. I know you have some stuff you want to add.
Well, I mean,
in our rapid segment,
we could undercut the cartels are pretty nasty. Like, let's admit it. That said, that's not most Mexican people. Just like when the mafia was at its height in the United States, that's not most Americans, right? You know, we're not the worst elements of the criminals in any given nation. But we could undercut the cartels pretty quickly. The best way to do it would be to legalize all drugs.
Yes.
Because I don't know anybody. Oh, you're going to legalize crystal meth? Yes. Well, then people are going to do it. Well, my question is, if they legalize crystal meth tomorrow, are you going to go out and try it? No. And the fact that it's illegal doesn't stop anybody from doing it, and it doesn't stop anybody from doing heroin. In fact, there's really good arguments to show that if we legalize, and I do not mean decriminalize, decriminalizing still gives police an excuse to pull over somebody who's driving while black, because technically it's against the law. Let's do a search, full legalization of all drugs. These folks have nothing to sell. right? But remember, we fund our wars. We got the opium trade going again in Afghanistan. Remember what happened with the CIA during the wars in Central America and El Salvador and Nicaragua? We were bringing cocaine and crack into the United States. The CIA did it with Air America and heroin during the Vietnam War. So they want the illegal drug trade to continue. Of course they do, because it's a great way to launder money and to do terrible things around the world. But so they could do that. People could demand that we legalize drugs. Then there'll be no cartels. But just think of the audacity to say that we have the right to invade and occupy another nation, which is the opposite of what she's saying about Ukraine. Marjorie Taylor Greene is an idiot, but
exactly,
she's their useful idiot. But Mexico is our neighbor. We don't have a right to plow in there. And I will say one thing, which is another discussion altogether. They don't care about drugs, you're right. Addiction is a demand, not a supply issue. There's a reason overdoses skyrocketed during the worst of the pandemic, because our social networks were disrupted. Our sense of who we were in context with the world around us was turned upside down. People were depressed. They had anxiety. All of these things happened. And so they turned to drugs, which made it easier to keep going in a fairly sick society. So, there's a lot of really good work done on this. But one of them, and I'll just take a quick second. If is it all right? You tell me up or down. It'll take about a quick minute. They did an experiment called the Rat Park experiment, because they put rats in cages. And when you put rats in cages and you give them heroin or cocaine, the rat will just become addicted to whatever the drug is and eventually overdose and die. And they've been doing that for years. What they decided was, let's put rats, instead of isolating them in a cage, let's put them in a cage with other rats so they can have social relationships. And let's give them things to do. So they have like little balls to play on and wheels to run on. And it's much nicer. They can have families, and they could, cuddle together. When they did that and they introduced the drugs into the rat park, which is what they called it, most of the rats didn't do it. More than once they tried it. None of them got addicted and none of them overdosed. It is not the drug. It is our social environments which determine addiction. Yes. If the United States was serious, neither party is, about fighting addiction, we would stop focusing on supply and we would start focusing on creating a society that values each and every one of us, that helps people exist and reach their fullest capacity. That is not in the agenda of neoliberals or neocons. So, but it is the agenda of us, and there's more of us than there are of them.
Well said, Zinkins. That's such an important conversation to have, and I'm glad you made that point. The last thing we're bringing up regarding this story is that it's not just Marjorie Taylor Greene and the right wing. Trust me, this is an establishment thing that's going on, because AMLO is pissed off the West. The United States have decided a strategy of strong arming otherwise close allies like India and Mexico to support their agenda. Now, this is CNN. Look at the fear-mongering towards the liberals. So you saw Marjorie Taylor Greene, how they used the border. They used the border to fear right-wingers. Look at the Democrat strategy. You see how they both play a role? Mexican president's electoral reform raises red flags, says random jagoff journalists. So here comes the liberal talking point of, we need to send in the troops to save democracy. You see how the right wing heart tug is all about immigration? The liberal heart tug is, look at AMLO doing to democracy. Now, I will be clear. I maybe need to look more into this. I promise you, this reform is not exact. It was not what the United States empire says. I need to look more into it. But they are trying to use any pretext to claim that AMLO is some authoritarian autocrat, anything to attack him. And I've seen this ramp up more in CNN and MSNBC. So that's my last thing I want to show. This showed just one. It showed both sides and how their desperation to attack Mexico and essentially any ally who speaks out against U.S. strategy. Mexico has been a long-time trading partner. AMLO, this is why no one really expected this, because Mexican presidents always had to be under the rule of thumb under the United States for obvious reasons, because they're so close, such an important partner. But AMLO's like, man, fuck neoliberalism. I'm thinking about nationalizing crucial industries, and that is a giant threat to someone who's right next to the United States. So it's funny they criticize Russia for imposing their hegemony on their neighbor in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the United States can do that to Mexico all they want, right? Any last thoughts you guys have on this statement? Professor Zankis and CJ. We can wrap this up here. Go ahead, CJ. I'll pass to you. Oh, unless you go ahead.
I'll wait.
No, as long as you can go.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, the Monroe Doctrine exists, right? So, Professor Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago has done excellent analysis on U.S. and NATO's shenanigans in Ukraine over the years. 7 years ago, he was predicting what happened today if the United States didn't stop and NATO didn't stop trying to expand eastward, which we told Russia we wouldn't do. And one of the examples he uses is we've got the Monroe Doctrine in our hemisphere. By the way, it's not our hemisphere, but we think it is. We think of the entire North and South America continents as our playground, and therefore everybody has to kowtow to us. We still have sanctions on Cuba. Cuba is a tiny little nation that has never posed a threat to the United States. Why are they so afraid of countries, especially brown countries in the global South? And Mexico is near the global South for the most part, that embrace nationalism and or socialism / Marxism because they're afraid of it. If they really believed that First Nations, indigenous folks in these countries, non-colonial people, those that worked that land and built those countries, if we really believed that their choice, like Venezuela or Cuba, to be socialist or somewhere moving towards socialism was a terrible choice and it was going to hurt their economy, and we were worried about that, we wouldn't be so afraid of it. We wouldn't have to fight it. We would just let them implode. We are terrified more than ever, we, the United States government, of socialism, of indigenous rights. Here in the United States, we treat First Nations, indigenous folks, Native Americans, and others, descendants of slavery, horribly. We treat them as if they're still slaves and we're still colonists. And we do the same thing with Africa. And we better watch out because Africa's more and more aligning with Russia and China. And why would that be? Is it because they like their foreign policy? No, because those countries take the time, and it's not all done in a humane way. They take the time to build it up. Why do they hate the UK? Why did they not give a shit? Why were they dancing when, and the Irish were too, when Queen Elizabeth II kicked the bucket? Because the colonial powers perpetrated genocide on the global South, right? Including India, which is part of Asia, all of that. And I think that we keep going from the same playbook and we think it's going to work again. And I think it's like that abusive spouse who continues to abuse, thinking they'll always get away with it. And one day that intimate partner violence survivor stands up and leaves when they can, when it's safe for them to do it. We don't expect that to happen. How dare Mexico have a viewpoint different than ours? Both parties support this. Both parties in the United States are supremely based on the supremacy of white people of European descent. It is, and now they're flailing, and they're doing it in different ways with different rhetoric, but they're both part of it. So,
yeah.
To your point, and then we'll read the super chat. Who does now they're messaging their hate? The messaging for Mexico is easy for the GOP since they always have been messaging against immigrants, against Mexicans, China too. So you notice that the two things they fearmonger the most, China and Mexico, those are the two places that they're willing to go to war. Everything else they're seeing as, oh, let's not do that. But they see these two as sufficient enough to go to war with. But let me read the super chat. Funny how this happened immediately after Mexico nationalized their uranium and lithium industry and is considering joining BRICS. And I think Nick or both of us during our conversation, we pointed out the same thing. Like it feels like very a reaction to some of that other news.
A great comment by our comrade Jay. He was on Nick at Night last Wednesday for our return.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
You guys are gonna see a lot more of Jay. He's always fun to talk to, very knowledgeable as well.